Hi everyone, I'm Sam, and today we're going to talk about behavioral economics. Imagine you're standing in front of a shiny new car. It's sleek, has all the latest features, and you feel that instant attraction. The salesperson, who's been chatting with you for a while, gives you a special offer. But the catch is that this deal is only valid for the next hour. Suddenly, the car seems even more desirable. You feel the urge to act quickly, to make the purchase before the offer disappears, even though you haven't fully thought through the decision. This is a prime example of how emotions, cognitive biases, and limited rationality can influence our decisions. And it all falls under the realm of behavioral economics. Behavioral economics is a fascinating field that blends psychology with traditional economic theory. Traditional economics assumes that people are rational, making decisions based solely on logic and self-interest. But behavioral economics challenges that assumption. It argues that our decisions are often shaped by cognitive biases, emotions, social influences, and other irrational factors that go beyond simple logic. At its core, behavioral economics seeks to understand why we sometimes act in ways that defy traditional economic predictions. Why do we buy things we don't need? Why do we procrastinate on important tasks? Why do we stick to unhealthy habits even when we know they're bad for us? Let's dive into some key concepts in behavioral economics that help answer these questions. First, let's talk about loss aversion. This principle suggests that losses hurt more than equivalent gains. Imagine you win $100 in a game, but then you lose $50. Even though you're still $50 ahead, the emotional pain of losing that $50 feels worse than the joy of winning the $100. In the world of economics, this means that people will often go to great lengths to avoid losses, even if it's not in their best interest. For instance, you might hold on to a losing stock, hoping it will recover, simply because you can't bear to admit the loss. This leads to suboptimal decision-making. Another important concept is the endowment effect. This bias describes our tendency to place a higher value on things we own simply because we own them. Ever wonder why it's so hard to let go of an old worn-out jacket or a book you've already read? That's the endowment effect at play. Once something becomes part of our possession, we perceive it as more valuable than if we didn't own it. This can cause people to overvalue their possessions, which may lead to poor financial choices, like holding on to things for too long or overpricing items when trying to sell them. Anchoring is another powerful concept in behavioral economics. We often rely on initial information as a reference point, even when it's irrelevant. For example, imagine you're shopping for a new pair of shoes, and the first pair you see is priced at $200. Later, you come across another pair that's priced at $100. Even though both pairs may be equally priced in terms of quality, your perception of the second pair is influenced by the first price. The $200 price tag serves as an anchor, making the $100 pair seem like a bargain, even if it's still expensive. The availability heuristic is a mental shortcut that helps us make decisions based on immediate examples that come to mind. If you hear a lot about airplane crashes on the news, you might begin to overestimate the likelihood of them happening. Even though statistically, air travel is one of the safest modes of transportation, your mind clings to the recent examples you've heard about. This bias shows how our decisions can be shaped by the ease with which information comes to mind, rather than by the facts or probabilities. Now let's talk about hyperbolic discounting, a term that refers to our tendency to favor immediate rewards over long-term benefits. This explains why it's so tempting to grab that extra piece of cake even when you're trying to lose weight, or why it's easy to put off saving for retirement. We're wired to prioritize the present moment over the future, which can lead to decisions that feel good in the short term but have negative consequences later on. Finally, let's consider social preferences. Humans are inherently social creatures, and we often make decisions based on what others are doing. This is known as social influence, and it plays a major role in everything from consumer behavior to voting. For instance, if you see a lot of people buying a particular brand of sneakers, you might feel inclined to buy them too, even if they're not your top choice. Social preferences also explain phenomena like peer pressure and groupthink, where individuals make decisions not based on their own preferences, but based on what the group around them is doing. These are just a few of the foundational concepts in behavioral economics. What makes the field so compelling is its ability to explain why people make decisions that are sometimes irrational or unpredictable. It blends the psychological aspects of decision-making with traditional economic theory, offering a richer, more nuanced view of human behavior. Take a moment to think about your own choices. Have you ever gone on an impulse shopping spree, bought a product because it was on sale, or stuck with a decision that didn't seem to make sense in hindsight? You're not alone. We all fall prey to these biases. The key takeaway here is that understanding these concepts can help us become more aware of the factors influencing our decisions and, ultimately, help us make better choices. To understand how behavioral economics came to be, we need to take a step back in time. The road to where we are today in this fascinating field is paved with breakthroughs, challenges to conventional wisdom, and some pretty brilliant minds. In the early days, the world of economics was dominated by a belief in rationality. Think of the classical economists like Adam Smith and John Stuart Mill, who laid the foundation for economic thought. They argued that individuals make decisions based on logic, aiming to maximize their own utility or happiness. People, in their view, were self-interested but perfectly rational actors in a marketplace where supply and demand reigned supreme. This view held strong for a long time. But as the field of economics evolved, certain questions began to arise that didn't fit neatly into this rational model. People were consistently making choices that didn't seem to make sense. Why did individuals save money one month, only to spend it on unnecessary things the next? Why did they gamble away their savings, or choose the immediate gratification of a quick snack over long-term health? Clearly, something was missing from the picture, and economists started to pay attention. Enter psychology. In the 1970s, psychologists Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky started to investigate how human biases and cognitive limitations affect decision-making. They weren't interested in economics as a field of study at first. They were just curious about how our brains work when we make choices. They began to demonstrate that humans are not always the perfectly rational creatures that traditional economics had assumed. Instead, our decisions are often influenced by the way we process information, by emotions, and by unconscious biases. This work would eventually challenge the core assumptions of economic theory and lead to the creation of behavioral economics. Kahneman and Tversky's partnership was a game changer. Together, they developed some of the most important insights into how we make decisions. One of their most groundbreaking contributions was prospect theory. This theory was introduced in 1979 and would go on to become a cornerstone of behavioral economics. Prospect theory challenged the idea that people always act rationally to maximize their utility. Instead, it showed that people's choices are often influenced by how potential outcomes are framed, specifically by their fear of loss and the way they weigh potential gains and losses. The essence of prospect theory is that people are loss-averse, meaning we feel the pain of losing something more intensely than the pleasure of gaining something of equal value. For example, if you were to lose $100, it would hurt you much more than the joy you'd feel from gaining $100. Kahneman and Tversky showed that this bias could influence a variety of decision-making scenarios, from investing money to making everyday choices. Their work didn't just challenge the concept of rationality in economics, it provided concrete, empirical evidence of how human psychology shapes economic decisions. Their contributions were so impactful that in 2002, Daniel Kahneman was awarded the Nobel Prize in Economic Sciences, an extraordinary recognition for a psychologist. In fact, Kahneman's award is particularly significant because it was the first time someone who wasn't a traditional economist received the Nobel in this field. This was a clear indication that psychology was taking a central role in the study of economics. Kahneman and Tversky weren't alone in questioning traditional economic theories. In the 1980s, another psychologist, Richard Thaler, started to apply psychological insights to economic behavior, leading him to develop the field of nudge theory. Nudge theory explores how small, subtle changes in the way choices are presented can have a significant impact on the decisions people make. Thaler argued that by designing environments that take advantage of human biases, policymakers, businesses, and even individuals could nudge people toward better choices without restricting their freedom to choose. For example, placing healthier food options at eye level in a grocery store encourages people to make better dietary decisions without forcing them to avoid unhealthy options altogether. Thaler's work, particularly his collaboration with Cass Sunstein in the book Nudge, has had a profound impact on public policy and business strategies worldwide. The concept of nudging is just one example of how behavioral economics has moved beyond academia and into real-world applications. As we'll explore later, this field of study has expanded to influence everything from how we save for retirement to how governments design policies aimed at improving public health. But the journey wasn't always smooth. Behavioral economics had to fight an uphill battle against traditional economists who were reluctant to accept that humans weren't always rational. These economists, known as neoclassical economists, argued that rationality was the cornerstone of economic theory. But as behavioral insights continued to mount, it became harder to ignore the undeniable evidence that people don't always act in predictable ways. One of the pivotal moments in the field's development came in 1991 when George Akerlof and Robert Shiller introduced the concept of animal spirits in their book Animal Spirits: How Human Psychology Drives the Economy and Why It Matters for Global Capitalism. This idea suggested that emotions and psychological factors, such as fear, confidence, and trust, influence economic decisions. The book argued that these animal spirits had a major role in explaining the behavior of financial markets, especially during times of economic volatility. The concept of animal spirits helped to bridge the gap between behavioral economics and the study of macroeconomic phenomena like recessions, bubbles, and market crashes. The growing influence of behavioral economics eventually led to its integration into public policy. In the 2000s, several governments began to adopt behavioral insights into their policymaking. The UK government established a behavioral insights team in 2010, known as the Nudge Unit, to explore how behavioral economics could be used to improve public services, reduce health costs, and encourage positive behavior changes. Similarly, countries like the US and Australia followed suit, applying behavioral principles to issues like energy consumption, organ donation, and tax compliance. As we look back at the history of behavioral economics, we can see how a small but powerful shift in perspective has revolutionized the way we understand human behavior. It started with a challenge to the idea of human rationality and grew into a global movement that influences everything from business practices to public policies. It's a field that continues to evolve, and as we move into the future, it's clear that behavioral economics will only become more integrated into our everyday lives. As we've seen, behavioral economics has made a significant mark on the world of economics, shifting our understanding of human decision-making from a purely rational perspective to one that acknowledges the role of psychology and emotion. Yet, despite its growing influence, there are still a few misconceptions about what behavioral economics is and how it operates. Let's clear those up, and then explore some of the exciting ways this field is being applied today and what the future holds. First off, one common misconception about behavioral economics is that it's all about manipulation. The term nudge sometimes gets a bad rap, with people thinking that policymakers, businesses, and governments are secretly pulling the strings to control our behavior. In reality, nudging is not about forcing people into certain decisions, but rather about creating environments that help people make better choices, often by taking advantage of natural human biases in a positive way. The idea is to design options in a way that aligns with people's best interests, without limiting their freedom of choice. For instance, putting healthier food at the front of a cafeteria line doesn't ban junk food. It just makes the healthier option easier to choose. It's about giving people subtle prompts that lead them toward choices they would likely make if they had more time, information, or energy. Another misconception is that behavioral economics only applies to personal decisions or small-scale economic behavior. While it's true that behavioral economics helps explain everything from why we splurge on impulse buys to why we procrastinate, it also plays a significant role in larger economic and policy decisions. Governments around the world are increasingly using behavioral insights to tackle societal issues. One prominent example is the use of default options in pension plans. Studies have shown that people are far more likely to save for retirement if they are automatically enrolled in a retirement savings plan, rather than having to opt in. By simply changing the default setting, behavioral economists have helped improve financial security for millions of people. This is a perfect example of how small changes in the structure of choices can lead to big improvements in outcomes. Similarly, in the realm of healthcare, behavioral economics has been used to encourage healthier behaviors. In one experiment, researchers found that people were more likely to get vaccinated when the process was made easier, such as offering flu shots at local pharmacies or workplaces, rather than requiring them to make a special trip to a doctor's office. By lowering the effort required to make the good choice, public health officials have been able to increase vaccination rates without mandating anything. This is a key principle of behavioral economics, making the right choice the easy choice, which is much more effective than trying to force people to comply with regulations. One of the most interesting applications of behavioral economics is in the world of marketing. Marketers have long used psychological insights to influence consumer behavior, but the tools and techniques available today are more sophisticated than ever before. For example, companies use scarcity as a way to drive sales. Think of those limited-time offers you see all the time, like only 5 left in stock or flash sale ends in 3 hours. This taps into our innate fear of missing out, FOMO, a bias that makes us act quickly when we feel there's a limited opportunity. Marketers also use social proof, which is the tendency to follow the actions of others. Ever notice how online product reviews or the number of people following a brand on social media can influence your own purchasing decisions? This is social proof at work. These strategies aren't just tricks. They're based on our deep-seated behavioral tendencies, and companies are leveraging this understanding to shape their marketing strategies. But beyond these practical applications, behavioral economics also has the potential to shape the future of policymaking, especially in areas like climate change, education, and inequality. For instance, in the fight against climate change, behavioral economics can help design policies that encourage individuals and businesses to reduce their carbon footprints. One approach is to create energy labels for products that show how much energy they consume, much like nutrition labels on food. By making energy use more transparent and visible, people may be more inclined to make environmentally friendly choices, simply because the information is presented in a clear, easy-to-understand way. In the realm of education, behavioral economics could help improve learning outcomes by addressing procrastination and boosting motivation. Imagine a system that sends students gentle reminders about upcoming deadlines, rewards them for completing small tasks on time, or even breaks down large assignments into smaller, more manageable steps. These interventions, based on behavioral principles, could make a big difference in student performance, helping to combat the common struggles of motivation and time management. As for the future, behavioral economics is poised to continue growing, both as a field of study and in terms of its applications. One of the most exciting developments is the increasing use of data and technology to apply behavioral insights on a larger scale. With the rise of big data, researchers and policymakers can track behavior in real time and adjust their interventions accordingly. For example, apps and websites that track your exercise habits, spending, or even mental health can be used to provide personalized nudges that encourage healthier behaviors. This is where behavioral economics intersects with technology to create an even more powerful tool for improving outcomes. Yet, as the field continues to grow, there are still challenges. For one, there's a need for more rigorous, long-term studies to ensure that behavioral interventions have lasting effects. It's not enough to make a small change that nudges people in the right direction temporarily. We need to understand how to create sustainable behavior change over time. Additionally, while behavioral economics is undeniably useful, there's a concern about the ethical implications of manipulating behavior. How do we ensure that nudges are being used for good and not to exploit people's biases for profit or political gain? At its heart, behavioral economics is about understanding people, not as mere rational agents, but as complex, emotional beings who often make decisions that defy logic. By acknowledging our cognitive biases and using them to design better policies, products, and experiences, behavioral economics is improving lives on a global scale. From retirement savings to public health, marketing strategies to climate change, the principles of behavioral economics are helping us make smarter choices and create better outcomes. So the next time you find yourself in a tricky decision, whether it's choosing between two products, trying to save for the future, or deciding how to spend your time, remember that your mind is wired in fascinating ways. Understanding the science behind our choices can help us make better decisions for ourselves, and maybe even for the world around us. After all, it's not just about what we choose, it's about why we choose it. And in the world of behavioral economics, that's where the real magic happens. That's it for today, and I'll see you in the next episode.